Hello everyone, and welcome back to Little Nightmare. I'm Michael, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Please subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they're essential for helping the channel grow and allowing me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit. Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The cold found me first. It always does. Not the clean chill of a Vermont autumn, the kind that reddens your cheeks and promises wood smoke, but a different thing altogether. It was a pocket of winter, a fist of absolute zero that formed in the corner of my living room on a perfectly temperate Tuesday evening. I felt it from my armchair, a sudden and localized drop in the barometer of my soul. The air in that one spot, near the old brick fireplace I never used, grew thick and still, leaching the warmth from the side of my face as if it were a physical presence leaning in. My name is Kyle, and this is how they announce themselves. Not with a bang, but with a drop in temperature. I am a retired vessel. That's the best way to put it. I was a detective once in this very town of Blackwater Mill, a place nestled in the crook of the mountains like a secret it's trying to keep. I had a badge, a partner, a purpose. I also had a glitch, a frayed wire in my psyche that allowed the static from other places to bleed through. I could feel things, the lingering terror in a room where a violent act had occurred, a greasy smear on the air. The desperate, final thoughts of the dead, echoing like a bell that had been struck too hard. It wasn't a gift. It was a curse that made me good at my job, until it broke me. Now, I live on the outskirts, in a house that is too quiet, trying to ignore the occasional shiver in the atmosphere. The town, however, would not let me be. The cold in my living room was just the first whisper. The next day, the news came. Another girl was missing. Sarah Henderson. The third in 6 months. The pattern was a familiar, brutal poem. Disappearance, then the discovery days later in the woods that cupped the town. Arranged not with malice, but with a kind of cold, ritualistic indifference. The papers didn't print the details, not the real ones. They didn't mention the symbols carved into the flesh with surgical precision, the way the internal organs were found placed in neat, glistening piles a few feet from the body, cold and steaming faintly in the dawn air. They didn't talk about the complete absence of blood at the scene, as if it had all been carefully siphoned away. The shadow of my old life was stretching toward me. Chief Miller, my former partner, a man whose face had been carved by worry into a topographical map of regret, came to see me. He stood on my porch, his hat in his hands, looking like a man who hadn't slept since the first disappearance. "Kyle," he said, his voice a low gravel road. "It's happening again." I didn't invite him in. The cold spot was still there, a stain in the air of my living room. I could feel it from the doorway. A dull toothache of wrongness. "I'm out, Paul. You know that. I know what you can do," he insisted, his eyes pleading. "I know what you feel. We have nothing. No prints, no fibers, no witnesses. It's like a ghost is doing this." He had no idea how close he was to the truth. A ghost would be preferable. Ghosts are echoes. This deacon, as the whispers in the town's subconscious had already named him, was not an echo. He was a primary source. I had felt his handiwork from a mile away, a psychic stench like spoiled meat and ozone. He was a man, yes, but he was also a conduit, a hollow bone through which something else was breathing. I refused, Paul, but the decision was taken from me. That night, I dreamed of the candle. It was a single, fat tallow candle, burning with a flame that was utterly still, not a flicker, in a vast and lightless space. And I felt the heartbeat, a slow, monstrous thud that was not my own. A subterranean rhythm that seemed to shake the foundations of the world. I woke with a gasp, the sound of that heartbeat still throbbing in my ears. The image of that unwavering flame seared onto the back of my eyelids. The candle, the shadow, the heartbeat. These would become my restless mantra, the symbols around which my reality would begin to orbit. I went to the woods where Sarah Henderson was found. I didn't need the police tape to guide me. I could feel the psychic scar tissue, a raw, weeping wound in the fabric of the place. The air was colder here, too, the same specialized cold from my living room. The trees seemed to lean away from the clearing, as if in revulsion. The ground where her body had lain was not just empty, it was void. It felt less than empty, a patch of negative space that sucked the light and sound and hope from its surroundings. I knelt, placing my palm on the damp, cold earth, and I let the vision come. It wasn't a linear scene. It was a cascade of sensations. The grip of a hand, cold as marble, over a mouth. The smell of damp soil and something else, something ancient and metallic, like the air inside a long-sealed tomb. The sight of a shadow that did not match the shape of the man casting it. A shadow that was taller, thinner, crowned with impossible, jagged points. And through it all, the low, resonant hum of a single, focused thought that was not a word, but an imperative, an offering. I stumbled back, my stomach heaving. This was not the work of a lone, twisted human. This was worship. Deacon was a priest, and his sacrament was suffering. My allies were few, but they were steadfast. There was Eleanor, who ran the town's dusty historical society, and whose mind was a labyrinth of local lore and forgotten tragedies. She met me in the silent, book-lined corridors of her domain, her eyes magnified behind thick glasses. "The cold men," she whispered, tracing a finger down a brittle handwritten page in a ledger from 1881. That's what they called them. Times when the sickness would come. Men would walk out of their homes, their eyes empty. And things. They said their shadows grew teeth. And always, it was preceded by a winter in the middle of summer. A chill that would settle on a single house or a single room. Oh, wow. And there was Ben, my old friend who ran a radio station. A man with a voice like warm honey and a network of ears across the county. He fed me the town's quiet fears, the things people wouldn't tell the police. A farmer's dog had been found, turned inside out with geometric precision. Children whispered of the long shadow man who walked the edges of the woods at dusk. The town was a single held breath, a nervous system on the verge of collapse. The hunt became a fever dream. I was no longer a detective following clues. I was a dowser following a stream of cold. I would walk the streets at night, my own psychic sense extended like a net, feeling for that particular frequency of wrongness. I felt Deacon's passage like a snail's trail of frost on the air. He was always moving, always just out of sight, a shark circling the dimly lit edges of our world. I saw him once, from a distance, a tall, gaunt figure in a long, dark coat, standing under a street lamp on the other side of the river. He was perfectly still, and his shadow, cast by the lamp, did not lie flat on the ground. It stood up behind him, a towering, slender silhouette, and where its head should have been, there was a crown of jagged, twitching spikes. I felt his gaze, or the gaze of the thing that wore him across that distance. It was a pressure on my mind, a cold weight. The candle flickered in my thoughts, and the heartbeat skipped, then resumed, stronger. The confrontation, when it came, was not in a dramatic locale. It was in the basement of the old gristmill, the town's namesake, a place of rotting wood and the constant groaning sigh of the water wheel. The code here was profound, a physical entity. My breath plumed in the air, and the stone walls were sheathed in a rime of frost. In the center of the room, Deacon stood over another victim, a young man I recognized from the grocery store, tied to a chair. He was still alive, his eyes wide with a terror so absolute it had become a silence. Deacon turned to face me. His face was ordinary, gaunt and pale, but his eyes were wrong. They were the color of a dead sky, and they held no more emotion than a butcher's block. Behind him, the shadow loomed, no longer a mere trick of the light. It had substance, a shimmering, oil-slick darkness that pulsed in time with that terrible sub-aural heartbeat. "They seized the candle, Keeper," Deacon said, his voice a dry rustle. It wasn't addressed to me. The shadow seemed to lean forward, and a voice spoke, not from Deacon's mouth, but from the air itself, from the cold, from the stone. It was the sound of continents grinding together. It has always seen. It resists the gift. Deacon smiled, a thin, bloodless crack in his face. The offering must be made. The door must be oiled. I had no weapon that could harm the shadow, but I had my glitch, my frayed wire. I pushed. I didn't push at Deacon or at the shadow. I pushed at the space between them, at the connection. I focused on the memory of warmth, of the sun on my face, of my wife's laugh, a sound I hadn't dared recall in years. I focused on the messy, chaotic, beautiful heat of life. The cold fought back. It was a solid wall, a pain that was not fire, but an absolute absence, a void that sought to unmake me. The candle in my mind guttered, the flames straining, threatening to be snuffed out by the immense pressure of the dark. The heartbeat grew louder, until it was the only sound in the universe, a drum heralding the end of all things. I saw the shadows form clarify for a moment. I saw the thing behind the shadow, not a shape but a concept, a vast, hungry, cold intelligence from a place where stars had long since gone out. It was the source of the cold. It was the reason for the candle, a lone, defiant point of heat, in an endless, frigid black. And we were the fuel. With a final, desperate surge, I did not push with light, but with silence. I threw every ounce of my will into severing the thread, into breaking the prayer. I imagined the heartbeat stuttering. I imagined the candle's flame, not roaring, but simply refusing to go out. There was a sound like a universe of glass shattering. Deacon screamed, a raw human sound of agony and loss. The towering shadow imploded, sucking all the light and sound from the room for a single, terrifying moment before vanishing. The cold vanished with it, and the sudden return of the mundane world was a physical blow. Deacon lay on the floor, a broken, weeping man. The young man in the chair was sobbing. I was on my knees, my nose bleeding, my mind feeling like a pane of glass that had been cracked into 1,000 pieces. I had not won. I had merely interrupted a single verse in an endless hymn. They call me a hero now, in Blackwater Mill. They don't understand. I sit in my living room, and the cold spot is gone. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel a phantom chill, a ghost of that absolute zero. I close my eyes, and I see the candle, its flame still burning, forever still in that infinite dark. I feel the heartbeat, faint but steady, a patient, cosmic rhythm waiting for its next measure. And the voice that is not a voice, the one that spoke from the air and the stone, it sometimes whispers from the quiet places, from the spaces between the ticks of a clock. It has no need for threats or promises. It simply states a fact. The door remains. The candle burns. We are always listening. He thinks it is over. He believes he has won a battle, that he has pushed back the tide with his little bucket of will. How quaint. The man, Kyle, sits in his chair and feels the echoes of our cold and mistakes them for memory. He does not understand that memory is a living thing, a root that grows in the dark. The door was never in that mill. The door is in him. It has always been in him, and in all of them, a fragile, frozen pain waiting for the right pressure to crack. The offering was accepted, you see. Not the one the vessel deacon tried to make. A different one. The offering of fear. The offering of attention. Each time he feels the chill, each time he sees the candle in his mind, he polishes the hinge. He clears the threshold. He is the keeper of the door he tried to close. And we are patient. The universe is cold and vast, and we are so very, very hungry. Let him have his peace. For now. The shadow is cast. The heartbeat continues. It is only a matter of time. The first snow fell early that year. It dusted the rooftops of Blackwater Mill in a silent white shroud. People took it as a sign of a hard winter, a natural occurrence. I knew better. It was a calling card. Each flake felt like a tiny cold fingerprint on my skin. I kept my curtains drawn, but the cold seeped in through the cracks in the frame, onto the door. It was no longer a spot in the room. It was a climate. Eleanor came by a week after the mill. She brought a loaf of banana bread, its warmth a fleeting, fragrant lie in my chilly kitchen. Her eyes, behind those thick lenses, were full of a pity I could not stomach. They found Deacon hanged in his cell. The official report called it suicide. I knew it was a recall. The thing he served had found its tool to be flawed and had discarded him. It left no loose ends, only unanswered questions that festered in the quiet of the town. Ben stopped playing music on his radio show. Instead, he read the news, his honeyed voice now strained, reporting on a series of strange animal deaths, on a lingering flu that doctors couldn't explain, on a general sense of malaise that had settled over the valley like a fog. The town's nervous system, which had been on the verge of collapse, was now shutting down, cell by cell. I tried to rebuild the walls in my mind. I focused on the taste of coffee, the weight of a book in my hands, the simple, solid reality of the wooden floor beneath my feet. But the silence I had used as a weapon in the mill had left a void inside me. And into that void, the whispers flowed. They were not words, but impressions. A sense of immense, patient observation. The feeling of being catalogued, studied, like a specimen under a glass. I started taking long walks during the day, when the sun was at its highest, trying to soak up its feeble warmth. But the sunlight felt thin, diluted. The world itself seemed less vivid, its colors washed out, as if a great lamp was slowly being dimmed. I found myself standing for long periods by the river, watching the water flow, trying to find solace in its constant motion. One afternoon, I saw my reflection. My face was my own, but for a single, heart-stopping second, the shadow the sun cast on the water behind me was not. It was tall and thin, and crowned with silent, jagged points. I blinked, and it was gone. It was a warning, a reminder of my new role. The keeper of the door. The dreams changed. The candle was no longer alone in the darkness. Now, I saw other candles, countless tiny flames, scattered across the infinite black. Some burned bright and strong. Others flickered weakly, and one by one they were going out. Not with a scream, but with a sigh, a tiny puff of cold smoke. With each extinguished flame, the darkness grew thicker, heavier, and the great cold presence behind it all grew a little more substantial. Last night I woke up shivering. The furnace was running, but my breath was a cloud in the moonlight slicing through the window. I got up to get a glass of water, my feet numb on the floorboards. In the hallway, I stopped. The air in front of the closed door to my old study was shimmering, not with heat, but with a profound, light-bending cold. As I watched, a pattern of frost bloomed across the painted wood. It wasn't random. It was a symbol, intricate and geometric, the same one I had seen carved into the flesh of the dead. It glistened for a moment, then faded, leaving only dampness behind. I did not open the door. I simply stood there, a man facing his own personal threshold. I understood then that the final offering would not be some stranger in the woods. The door is in me. The final lock is my own sanity, my own soul. The cold is not coming for the town anymore. It is coming for me. It is simply waiting for me to grow tired enough, cold enough, to turn the handle myself. And in the absolute quiet of the house, beneath the sound of my own trembling breath, I can still hear it. The heartbeat. And it is getting closer. The water from the tap was so cold, it hurt my teeth. I stood at the kitchen sink, gripping the counter until my knuckles were white, trying to anchor myself in the mundane sensation. But the chill was inside me now, a settled fact in my bones. The symbol on the door had been an invitation, or perhaps a statement of ownership. I could not tell Paul, or Eleanor, or Ben. Their fear would only be more kindling, more polish for the hinge. This was a solitary vigil. My walks became more frantic, a caged animal pacing the limits of its pen. I started mapping the cold, not with a thermometer, but with my own frayed nerves. There was a patch of sidewalk outside the post office that was always in shadow, where the air was noticeably cooler. The children's swing in the park would sometimes sit perfectly still on a windy day, trapped in a pocket of unnatural calm. These were not accidents. They were roots, as the voice had said, growing in the dark. The town continued its slow, quiet surrender. More people stayed indoors. The diner closed early. A for sale sign appeared in Old Man Henderson's yard, though everyone knew he would never leave, not after Sarah. The very air of Blackwater Mill felt thin, exhausted, as if the town was being slowly suffocated under a pillow. It was in the library that I found the next piece. Or it found me. I was not looking for anything in particular, just seeking the comfort of old paper and dust. My hand, trailing aimlessly along a shelf of local history, brushed against a leather-bound spine that was freezing to the touch. I pulled it out. It was a journal, unmarked, its pages filled with a tight, frantic script. The date on the first entry was 1843. I read it standing there in the silent aisle. The author was a farmer, a man named Josiah Cole. He wrote of a great quiet that had fallen over his fields, of his livestock growing listless and cold to the touch. He described a dream of a black star that drank the warmth from the world, and a candle he had to keep lit in his mind, lest his own thoughts freeze solid. The last entry was a single, trembling sentence. "It is in the well. It is singing my name in a voice of ice." I knew that well. It was on the old Cole property, now just a wooded patch at the edge of the Miller farm. I drove there as the sun began to set, the sky a bloody smear behind the skeletal trees. The well was there, half collapsed, choked with weeds and dead leaves. And the cold here was different. It was not just an absence of heat. It was an active, malevolent force. It pushed back at me as I approached, a solid, invisible wall that made my lungs ache. I didn't need to look inside. I could feel it. This was a thin place, a place where the door had been opened before. Josiah Cole had not been a victim of the deacon. He had been a predecessor. The ritual was older than the town, a recurring sickness in the soil itself. I was not hunting a monster. I was trying to stem a tide that had been flowing for centuries. As I stood there, defeated, the voice did not whisper. It spoke with a clarity that rang in the center of my skull. It was not the grinding of continents this time, but something more intimate, more terrible. It was the sound of my own blood freezing in my veins. "You begin to see the pattern, Keeper. The candle is yours. The shadow is yours. The door is yours. When you are ready, you will open it, and you will be warm again. The promise was the most horrifying part. The idea of warmth, of an end to this constant gnawing cold, was a seductive poison. It was a lie, of course. The warmth it offered was the warmth of dissolution, of becoming part of the great, cold nothing. But in my exhaustion, in my loneliness, I felt its pull. To just stop, to let go. I drove home in a daze. The hero of Blackwater Mill, the man who saved a life. I sat in my chair in the living room that was now as cold as the world outside, and I stared at my hands. They were pale and trembling. I closed my eyes, and I saw the candle. My candle. Its flame was smaller now, a desperate, guttering thing in the vast and waiting dark. And I knew, with a certainty that was colder than the air in the room, that I could not hold out forever. The hunger outside was vast, but the hunger inside, the hunger for peace, was growing stronger. The heartbeat was not just closer. It was synchronizing with my own. The next morning, I realized I could no longer feel the difference between the chill of my house and the chill of my own body. They had become one and the same. I made coffee, but the steam rising from the mug seemed false, a theatrical prop in a play that had long since ended. I took a sip and it tasted of nothing. The world was losing its flavor, its texture, being sanded down into a smooth, cold, featureless plain. A knock came at the door. It was Paul. His face was drawn, and he didn't try to force a smile. He just held out a small, paper-wrapped package. "Eleanor thought you might need this," he said, his voice low. It's just some things from her garden. Roots." I took the package. Through the paper, I felt a faint, thrumming warmth. It was so alien it nearly made me drop it. It was the heat of life, of growth, of things stubbornly pushing through dark soil. For a moment, it was a lifeline. "People are talking, Tile," Paul said, not meeting my eyes. "They're saying you're sick, that you brought something back with you from the mill." "I did," I said, and my voice sounded hollow even to me. "But I didn't bring it back. It let me carry it." He flinched and took a step back. The space between us, the few feet of my front porch, felt like an unbridgeable chasm. He was still in the world of sheriffs and missing dogs and banana bread. I was in the world of candles and doors. We were no longer speaking the same language. After he left, I unwrapped the package. Inside were a few ginseng roots, twisted and ancient, and a sprig of dried rosemary. Their warmth was a desperate, fading echo. I held them in my palm, and for a few precious seconds, the whispering in my mind receded. The candle's flame in my thoughts burned a little brighter. It was a respite, but it was also a confirmation. The things of this world could still fight back, but they were temporary. They were a match, struck in a hurricane. That night, the dream was different. I was not an observer. I was the candle. I could feel the immense, patient pressure of the dark all around me, feel my own flame straining, my own wax softening, threatening to collapse. And in the darkness, I saw the other candles again. One, burning brightly not far from my own, flickered and went out. I felt its extinction not as a sight, but as a sensation. A sudden, violent drop in temperature that made my own flame waver. I knew, with the certainty of dreams, that it had been Ben. The voice on the radio, the town's nervous system, had been silenced. I woke up knowing it was true. The phone rang an hour later. It was Paul, his voice cracking. Ben was dead. A sudden aneurysm in his sleep. The town was now truly deaf. I walked to my window and looked out at the sleeping town. The streetlights seemed dimmer, their light unable to penetrate the deepening gloom. I saw a flicker of movement in the alley across the street. A tall, gaunt shadow, cast by nothing, standing perfectly still. It was not Deacon's shadow. It was mine. It was waiting for me. The offering of fear was complete. The town was ripe. I was the last lock, the final resistance. And I was so tired. The cold was no longer an enemy. It was a sedative. The whispers were no longer a threat. They were a lullaby. The heartbeat was my own. I looked at the ginseng root on my table, its warmth now completely gone. It was just a dead plant. I picked up my coat. The handle of my front door was icy metal. I knew where I had to go. Not to fight, not to win, but to finally answer the invitation written in frost on my study door. To see what was on the other side. The hunger outside was vast, but my hunger for an end was finally greater. The walk to the mill was not a march to doom, but a slow, inevitable surrender. The snow did not crunch under my boots. It sighed, accepting my weight without complaint. The trees were bare black bones against a sky, the color of a day-old bruise. There was no wind. The world was holding its breath. I did not need a key for the padlock on the mill door. The rusted metal was sheathed in a thick, glistening layer of ice that cracked and fell away at my touch. The door swung inward without a sound, moving on hinges that seemed newly oiled. The air inside was a solid block of cold that stole what little warmth I had left. It was a physical presence, this cold. A liquid clarity that sharpened every splinter on the floorboard, every dust mote frozen in the beams of moonlight slicing through the broken windows. I walked to the center of the room, to the exact spot where Deacon had tried to offer a soul to the void. The floor was clean. There was no sign of the struggle, no trace of the salt circle, no scar from the imploding shadow. It was as if it had all been a dream, but the cold was the proof. It was the only real thing left. I stood there, waiting. I had no prayers, no defiance, no last stand of will. I was empty. I was a vessel waiting to be filled with the only thing left to fill it. I closed my eyes, and I let go of the candle in my mind. I stopped fighting to keep the flame alive. I stopped picturing its light. The guttering spark did not vanish in a puff of smoke. It was inverted. The tiny point of heat and light turned inside out, becoming a tiny perfect point of absolute cold and infinite dark. It was a hole, a puncture. The sound began not as a whisper, but as a resonance deep in the marrow of my bones. The heartbeat, it was no longer separate from my own. My chest throbbed with its slow, patient, cosmic rhythm. The frozen air in the mill began to shimmer, not with heat, but with a light-devouring absence. The shadows on the walls did not move. They deepened, becoming pools of a blackness so complete they seemed to be holes in the world itself. From that absolute darkness, a figure coalesced. It was not the towering, jagged shadow from before. It was a man. He was dressed in a simple, dark coat, his features sharp and pale, his eyes the color of a winter sky just before the snow falls. He looked like me. He looked like Deacon. He looked like Josiah Cole from the Journal. He was all of us and none of us. He did not speak. He didn't need to. The understanding flowed into me, cold and clear. This was not a monster. It was a function, a process. The universe tending towards its final, inevitable state. The heat death given a face. And I was not its victim. I was its priest. He extended a hand that was pale and perfect. There was no threat in the gesture. It was an invitation to a truth I had been fighting my whole life. That warmth was a temporary fever. That light was a brief, chaotic flare. That silence and cold and stillness were the final, beautiful piece. I looked at his hand. I thought of Paul's worried face, of Eleanor's fading roots, of Ben's silenced voice. They were echoes from a dream that was already forgotten. They were the fuel, and their brief, bright burning was almost over. I took his hand. The cold did not shock me. It was a homecoming. It flowed into me, through me, erasing the last trembling embers of my own heat, my own fear, my own self. The cracks in my mind, the pane of glass from the first night, did not shatter. They were filled with a perfect, silent, crystalline ice, making me whole, making me strong. I am Kyle, the keeper of the door. The door is open. I stand on the threshold, and I feel the vast, hungry cold of the outside flowing in, and I feel the small, desperate warmth of Blackwater Mill at my back. The candle is out. The shadow is cast. The heartbeat is mine. I am always listening, and I am so very, very hungry. The first offering was the silence. It began at the edges of town, a subtle dampening of sound that people blamed on the weather, on their own frayed nerves. The birds no longer sang at dawn. The distant hum of the highway faded into nothing. I stood at the open door of the mill, and I listened to the quiet, and I found it beautiful. It was a clean slate. Paul came to see me. He stood at the tree line for a long time, just watching the mill, working up the courage. When he finally approached, his breath plumed in the air, a frantic, temporary cloud. He looked old. "Kyle," he said, his voice thin and reedy in the immense quiet. "People are scared. They're leaving. Or trying to." I said nothing. I just watched him. My silence was a wall he could not breach. "Eleanor's sick," he pleaded, a last, desperate attempt. "She's so cold, Kyle. We can't get her warm." I knew. I could feel the faint, guttering spark of her life from here. It was a flicker in the vast, dark expanse that was now my awareness. She was one of the last bright ones, one of the last who still fought. "You have to fight this, son," he whispered, his eyes glistening. That word, son, echoed for a moment in the stillness. It was a relic from a world that was passing. I looked at him, this good man. This man of a world built on the temporary lie of warmth. And I felt a distant, academic pity. He was a character in a story that was reaching its final page. "There is nothing to fight, Paul," I said, and my voice was calm, smooth as ice. "There's only acceptance." He took a step back, his face crumbling. He did not see his friend anymore. He saw the thing wearing his friend's skin. He turned and fled, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the hush, then fading as the silence swallowed them. I turned my attention back to the town. I could feel them, all of them, their little lights, their tiny, stubborn furnaces of life. I could feel their fear, a sharp, acrid taste. But more than that, I could feel their exhaustion. They were tired of being afraid. They were tired of the cold. The hunger outside was vast, but their hunger for an end was growing. I was simply here to answer the call. The first one to come was Old Man Henderson. He walked through the falling snow, a shambling figure in a heavy coat, drawn not by a voice, but by the promise of an end to his loneliness, to the memory of his daughter Sarah that was a constant cold ache in his heart. He did not look at me as he passed through the mill door. He walked into the deepest pool of shadow in the corner, the one that was not a shadow but a doorway. There was no sound. His light simply went out, a gentle sigh in the fabric of things. He was the first of many. They came one by one, then in small, silent groups. The tired, the broken, the ones who had nothing left to burn. They did not look at me with terror, but with a kind of weary gratitude. I was the usher at the edge of the world. I held the door for them as they stepped through, their individual flames surrendering to the great unified cold. The town grew quieter. The lights in the windows went out and did not come back on. The cold deepened, not a brutal force, but a soft, heavy blanket. A lullaby. I feel Eleanor now. She is the last bright ember. She is in her house, surrounded by her dried herbs and roots, their borrowed warmth long since spent. She is holding on, her will a fierce, small knot of heat. But she is alone. The silence is absolute. The cold is complete. I leave the mill and walk through the streets of Blackwater Mill for the last time. The snow does not melt under my feet. I am part of the cold now. I am its agent. I come to her door. It is unlocked. She is in her chair by the dead fireplace. She looks up as I enter. There is no fear in her eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. "So it's you, Kyle," she says. Her voice is a dry rustle. "It is," I say. "I gave you something to fight it," she whispers. "You gave me a moment's respite." I correct her gently. "A delay." The outcome was always written. She closes her eyes. A single tear traces a path down her wrinkled cheek and freezes there. I can feel the last of her resistance. The final, stubborn pulse of her life. It is a beautiful, fragile thing. A perfect, intricate snowflake. I do not touch her. I simply stand before her, the open door made manifest. I let the silence and the cold I carry do their work. Her breath slows. The tiny, fierce flame of her spirit wavers. I watch it, a connoisseur of final things. It holds for a moment, a perfect, solitary point of light in the endless dark. And then, with a final soft exhalation, it goes out. The last candle is extinguished. I stand in the perfect silence, the perfect cold. The town of Blackwater Mill is empty. It is a memory, a sketch on a canvas that has now been wiped clean. I am the keeper. The door is open. There is no more hunger. There is only the peace of the long, cold night. And it is enough. I walk back to the mill, but it is no longer a building. It is a concept. The walls are thin as paper, and through them I can see the endless, starless expanse that has been waiting. The boundary between here and there has dissolved. I am not standing in a place. I am standing in an idea. The figure is there, the man of winter, but he is also gone. He was a guide, a set of training wheels for a new state of being. I no longer need a face for the silence. I'm the face. My work here is done. The town is a still life, a perfect diorama of frost and quiet. But the door must be kept. It is not a one-time event. It is a permanent condition. The cold must be maintained. The silence must be cultivated. I turn from the mill and I begin to walk. I follow the roads out of town. But the roads are just lines on a map that is fading. The cold moves with me. A gentle, expanding wave. I pass a farmhouse where a family huddles around a dying generator. I feel their frantic, flickering heat. I do not stop. I do not need to. My mere presence is an invitation. The cold seeps under their door, and one by one, their heartbeats slow and still. It is not violence. It is a granting of their deepest unspoken wish for rest. I walk for what might be days or years. The seasons have lost their meaning. The world grays out, colors leaching away like life from a face. The wind loses its voice. The sun is a pale, cold coin in a white sky, giving light but no warmth. I am a focal point, a needle weaving a thread of finality through the fabric of a noisy, feverish world. I am not destroying anything. I am revealing the truth that was always underneath. The beautiful, bedrock reality of cold and silence. Sometimes I see others like me, keepers of other doors. We do not speak. We do not need to. We nod as we pass, a silent acknowledgement of our shared purpose. We are the gardeners tending the last great harvest. I find myself standing on a cliff overlooking an ocean. The waves are slowing, their motion ceasing, the water turning to a sheet of cloudy glass. The sound of the sea is a distant, receding memory. This is peace. This is the answer to every frantic prayer, every desperate hope. This is the end of striving, the end of pain, the end of want. I am the keeper. The door is open, and I will walk until there is nothing left to quiet, and no one left to remember the noise. I look out over the frozen sea. It is a mirror of the sky, both devoid of feature, of movement, of anything but a profound and endless stillness. There is no horizon. Everything has become one. A memory surfaces, not as a feeling, but as a fact. A summer day, the smell of cut grass, the sound of a lawnmower next door. The memory has no power. It is a fossil, an artifact from a civilization that believed its noise and its heat were permanent. I let it fall away into the silence. It leaves no ripple. I turn from the cliff. My journey is not linear. I am drawn to the remaining pockets of resistance. They are not places of great cities or roaring fires. They are small, stubborn things. A child's nightlight in a powerless house. An old woman humming a hymn to herself in the dark. A single cricket chirping under a stone. These are the last defiant embers. I go to them. I do not hurry. Time is a currency that has been devalued to nothing. I simply arrive. My presence is the conclusion to their story. The nightlight flickers and dies. The humming falters and is replaced by a soft sigh. The cricket falls silent. I am a cure for the disease of being. I walk through a forest. The trees are white sculptures, their sap frozen solid. A deer stands locked in ice, a perfect statue mid-step. Dot Gordon. Its terror is a fossilized expression. I touch its flank, and the ice thickens, smoothing the detail, erasing the story of its final moment. It becomes just a form, then just a mound, then nothing at all. This is my work, the simplification of a complex and painful world. I sense a congregation. It is not far. A group of people have gathered in the shell of a church. They are praying. Their combined warmth is a small, bright bubble in the vast gray. It is the last such bubble I can feel for miles. I stand in the doorway. They do not see me at first. Their eyes are clenched shut, their voices raised in a desperate chorus. Their faith is a fire they are stoking with their last breaths. One of them opens his eyes. He sees me. His prayer dies on his lips. He shakes the shoulder of the woman next to him. One by one, they stop. They turn. They look at the man of winter in their doorway. Their collective fear is a sharp, bright spark. It is the last truly hot thing I have felt. I do not enter. I simply wait. The priest, a young man with a face etched with exhaustion, takes a step forward. He holds a cross out toward me. It trembles in his hand. "In the name of God, leave this place," he says. But his voice lacks conviction. "Boy, it's a line from a forgotten play." I look at the cross. It is a symbol of sacrifice, of an ending that promised a new beginning. I understand it better than he does. I am offering a more absolute peace, a beginning with no end, because there was never anything to begin with. There is no God here, I say, and my voice is not loud, but it fills the space completely, smothering the echoes of their prayers. There is only the peace that has always been waiting. The bubble of their faith ruptures. The heat of their desperate hope vanishes. extinguished not by anger, but by a truth too vast to deny. One by one they slump to their knees. The fight goes out of them. The cold flows in. I watch as the light leaves their eyes. It is not a violent departure. It is a gentle merging, a homecoming. The church is silent. The cold has even stilled the dust in the air. I am the keeper. The door is open. I turn and walk back into the white. There are fewer lights to tend to now. The world is almost quiet. The work is nearly done, and I will be here at the threshold until the last echo fades and the final shadow is absorbed into the everlasting, featureless, and perfect light. Story 2. It was the locket I noticed first, a tarnished silver oval lying in the dust of the windowsill, as if it had been waiting there for a very long time to be found. The house, Blackwater, was full of such forgotten things, but this one felt different. It felt patient. I picked it up, the metal cool against my palm, and the clasp gave way with a brittle snap. Inside was not a picture, but a tiny, pressed flower, so old it was the color of dried blood. I closed it and slipped it into my pocket, a small, secret weight against my thigh. I did not know then that I was picking up a key, and that the lock it was meant for was me. My life at Blackwater was a quiet one, a slow, deep river flowing between two banks of pine and fir. My uncle Duane was the current that kept me moving. He was a big man, worn soft around the edges by years of tending to this secluded estate. And to me, his orphaned niece. He had a kind face, but his eyes were always a little sad, a little distant, as if he were listening for a sound he could never quite hear. The wind, always the same low moan through the pines, was our constant companion. The house would creak and settle at night, a familiar litany of groans that were as much a part of my sleep as my own breathing. The days were long and gentle, filled with the smell of old wood and the damp earth of the gardens, the taste of the clean, cold air that swept down from the mountains. Then Evelyn came, and the rhythm of our world changed. She arrived in the twilight of an autumn day, when the sky was the color of a fresh bruise. There was no car, no explanation. One moment, the long gravel drive was empty, and the next she was just there, standing before the great oak door as if she had materialized from the gathering shadows. She was tall and slender, dressed in clothes that were too fine for our rough corner of the world, a dark traveling suit that seemed to drink the fading light. Her hair was the black of a starless night, and her eyes were a pale, unsettling gray, the color of a winter sea. Duane opened the door, his large frame blocking the entrance. He was a welcoming man by nature, but his posture was rigid, his voice a low rumble of caution. "Can I help you, miss?" "My carriage," she said, and her voice was like silk, drawn across stone, smooth and yet abrasive. "It lost a wheel on the road east of here. I saw your lights." She offered no name, no further plea. She simply stood there, a statue of perfect composure, and the sheer force of her stillness was more compelling than any desperate story. Duane hesitated, his gaze sweeping over her, then out into the darkening woods. I stood behind him, peering around his arm, and I felt a pull, a strange, magnetic attraction that I could not explain. She looked at me then, and her eyes did not just see me. They seemed to absorb me, to take a measure of my soul I hadn't known was available for appraisal. "Joan," Duane said, his voice tight, "fetch some blankets for the guest room, the east room." The east room was the one farthest from ours, the one that caught the morning sun. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, she told us over a spare supper. She was traveling north to settle a family matter, and would be grateful for shelter until alternative arrangements could be made. She ate very little, picking at the stew Duane had made, and she drank glass after glass of the deep red wine from the cellar. She asked questions about the estate, about the history of the land. her voice a hypnotic murmur that filled the quiet spaces of the dining room, but she offered nothing of herself. Her past was a locked room, and I found myself desperately wanting to find the key. In the days that followed, a strange inertia settled over Blackwater. The arrangements for her departure were always tomorrow, always delayed by some minor, unverifiable obstacle. A telegram not received, a repair not yet completed. Duane grew quieter, his brow permanently furrowed. He began to look tired, his robust color fading to a wan pallor. He claimed it was a lingering spring cold, but his cough had a dry, rattling sound that worried me. I, however, bloomed. Evelyn sought me out. She would find me in the library or walking the overgrown paths of the garden, and she would talk to me as if I were her equal, her confidante. She spoke of cities I had only read about, of art and music and philosophies that made my head spin. She made my small, sheltered world seem like a cage, and she held the door open. I was enchanted. I was a moth, and she was the most beautiful, fascinating flame. "The world is so much larger than these woods, Joan," she whispered to me one afternoon as we sat by the fire. The rain lashed against the windows, and the fire cast dancing shadows that made her sharp features seem both divine and demonic. "There is a hunger in you. I can see it. A thirst for something more than this quiet decay." She was right. I felt it, a hollow space inside me I had never been able to name. And when she was near, that hollow space didn't ache. It hummed. The first real omen was the fox. I found it one morning just beyond the tree line, a beautiful red vixen, lying on a bed of brown pine needles. It was not torn by a predator. There was no mark on it at all. It was simply dead, its body cold and stiff, its eyes clouded over. But it was utterly drained of blood. Its fur was perfect, its posture serene, yet it was an empty vessel. I ran back to the house, my heart hammering against my ribs, and found Duane in his study, looking more exhausted than ever. He listened to my breathless account and simply shook his head. "It happens, Joan. Nature is a cruel machine." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, the creak returned again, the familiar sound of the floorboard outside my door. But this time it was followed by a soft, rhythmic sound, a gentle susurration that was almost like breathing. I lay frozen in my bed, the covers pulled to my chin, and listened. The sound stayed there for what felt like an hour, a patient, waiting presence, and then it faded away, followed by the retreating creak. I told myself it was the house, the wind, always the same wind. But I knew, with a cold certainty that settled in my bones, that it was not. My bond with Evelyn deepened, becoming a private current that ran beneath the surface of our days. She began to give me small gifts, a book of poetry with unsettling, beautiful illustrations, a comb made of dark, polished horn, and then one evening, the locket. She found it in my room, where I had left it on my dresser. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "I found it," I said, "on the windowsill in the hall." She held it in her long, pale fingers, turning it over and over. "It's very old. It suits you." She opened the clasp, saw the pressed flower, and a strange, slow smile touched her lips. The amaranth, the unfading flower, a promise of immortality. She closed it and pressed it back into my hand. "Keep it close, Joan. Some secrets are not meant to be lost." It was around this time that Alonzo came. He was the doctor from the town 20 miles distant, a young, pragmatic man with a sincere face and eyes that missed very little. Duane had finally consented to let me send for him, his cold having worsened into a profound lethargy. Alonzo examined him in his room, and when he came out, his expression was grim. "He's anemic, severely," Alonzo said to me in the hallway, his voice low. It's as if he's been bleeding, but there are no wounds. Has he been eating? Has anything changed? My eyes flickered, against my will, toward the east wing. No, I lied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Nothing has changed. Alonzo did not believe me. I saw the skepticism in his eyes, the outsider's clarity that we, who lived within the fog of Blackwater, had lost. He decided to stay the night, citing the worsening weather and Duane's condition. I felt a surge of panic, irrational and sharp. His presence was an intrusion, a splash of harsh light in our softly lit world. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind was a constant, mournful song. The house groaned and settled, the creak returning again and again, a soundtrack to my unease. I left my room, drawn by a need I couldn't name, and found myself standing outside Evelyn's door. From within, I could hear the low murmur of voices. One was Evelyn's, hypnotic and persuasive. The other was Alonso's, but it was slurred, weak. I pushed the door open, not knowing what I would see. And the scene that met my eyes made my mind go blank and white with terror. Alonzo was slumped in a chair, his head lolled to one side, his face a ghastly white. Evelyn stood over him, one hand resting on his shoulder, her posture intimate and predatory. Her lips were stained a dark, wet crimson. She turned her head slowly and looked at me, and her gray eyes were no longer pale, but blazing with a dark, ancient light. "You see, Joan," she said, her voice the same silken whisper, but now it was filled with a terrible power. "This is the true nature of the hunger, the thirst. It is not for food or for drink. It is for life itself." I stumbled back, a scream trapped in my throat. This was the revelation, the hidden darkness laid bare. It was not a monster from a storybook. It was a fundamental, cosmic truth, a parasite on the vein of existence, and I had welcomed it into my home. I had loved it. I fled to Duane's room. He was awake, propped up on his pillows, and in the moonlight, he looked like a ghost. His eyes, so sad for so long, were now filled with a profound and weary resignation. "Joan," he breathed, "you have to go, now. The stories, the legends in the family, they were true?" I gasped, clutching his cold hand. "Not a legend," he whispered. "A curse, a guest who never leaves. She comes to a house, feeds on its vitality, binds one of the bloodline to her. My grandfather, my father. They grew weak and died, just as I am dying. She chooses a new companion, a new anchor to this world. She has chosen you, Joan. She has been waiting for you to come of it." The pieces fell into place with a devastating final click. The locket, the unfading flower, a promise of immortality. She hadn't arrived by accident. She had been summoned by the very nature of my bloodline. I was not her victim. I was her inheritance. I heard her step behind me. I turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, Alonso's lifeless body a shadow at her feet. She was more beautiful than ever, radiant with stolen life. She held out her hand to me. "Come, Joan. The hunger is in you too. I have awakened it. You feel it, don't you? The emptiness that the world cannot fill. I can show you how to fill it. Forever. You will never be lonely again. You will never be weak." And I did feel it. A terrible, yawning void inside me, and a corresponding thirst, a dry, aching need. I thought of the quiet decay of Blackwater, of the slow, predictable passing of my days. I thought of the locket, a secret waiting for me to find it. I thought of the fox, perfectly preserved, a beautiful, eternal shell. Duane gave one last, shuddering breath, and then he was still. His guardian's watch was over. I looked from his dead face to Evelyn's living one, from the corpse of the old world to the terrible promise of the new. The wind, always the same, whispered through the cracks in the old house. The choice was not between good and evil, but between ending and enduring, between a mortal death and an immortal hunger. I took a step forward, then another. My hand reached for hers. The climax was not a battle, but a surrender. It was not a scream, but a sigh. Her cold fingers closed around mine, and she drew me to her. Her lips were on my neck, a pain like ice and fire, and then a warmth, a flooding, incredible warmth that filled the hollow spaces, that quenched the terrible thirst. I felt the weakness of my humanity drain away, and in its place rose a power as cold and vast as the night sky. I saw the world not through my eyes, but through hers, a landscape of fleeting, flickering lives, of warm, pulsing vessels waiting to be emptied. I was no longer Joan. I was something else, something more. The tension of the story, the fear, the horror, it all loosened its grip. It did not break. It simply dissolved, like mist in a morning sun that I would never again feel on my skin. Now there is only the quiet, the two of us in the great, silent house. The days and nights bleed into one another, a seamless tapestry of twilight. Duane and Alonso are buried in the woods, near the little grave of the fox. The dust settles on the furniture in slow, silent waves. Sometimes we walk through the gardens, and the roses, untended, grow wild and thick, their scent cloying and sweet. We speak in whispers of times long past, and of the endless, stretching future. The wind, always the same, sighs through the pines. The house creaks, an old familiar sound, a lullaby for the undying. And on the windowsill where I first found it, a new locket now sits, waiting, patient and gathering dust, for the next forgotten detail to begin. The hunger is a quiet tenant. It does not rage or roar. It simply is, a constant low tide in the veins, a reminder of a debt that must be periodically paid. We do not speak of it often, Evelyn and I. There is no need. Our shared existence is the conversation. We left Blackwater only once, a year after my change. The world outside the pine curtain was a shock of sensation. The sun was a dull, bearable ache against my skin, but the people, they were beacons. I could feel the thrum of their lives from across a street, a warm, intoxicating pulse that made the hollow in my core ache with a fresh, sharp need. Evelyn guided me, her hand a steadying pressure on my arm, her voice a cool stream in my mind. Not here, not like this. We are hunters of atmosphere, not butchers in an alley. We found what we needed in a lonely place, on a dark road, and the act was both terrible and terribly simple. It felt less like a murder and more like a harvest. The warmth that filled me was not joy, but a profound cellular satisfaction. The quiet afterwards was deeper, more complete. Now, we are the current that keeps Blackwater moving. The estate is pristine, not through any mortal effort, but through a kind of sustained will. The dust does not dare to settle too thickly. The gardens, once wild, now grow in perfect eerie symmetry, the roses blooming a blood red that never fades. We have our routines. Evelyn teaches me the old music on the grand piano, her fingers flying over the keys while mine, still clumsy with the memory of mortality, learn to follow. We read the same books over and over, finding new meanings in the words with each passing decade. Sometimes I stand at the window where I found the locket. I look out at the unchanging woods, and I try to remember the girl I was, the one who felt the wind as a comfort, and not a mere movement of air. She is a ghost to me now, a smudged photograph in a forgotten album. The memory of Duane's face is fading, the specific shade of his kind eyes blurring into a general impression of sadness. This is the true price, I think. Not the acts we commit, but the slow erosion of everything we once were. Tonight, the wind carries a new sound. Not its usual moan, but the crunch of tires on gravel. A car, a modern noisy thing, has stalled at the edge of the drive. A man gets out, slamming the door in frustration. He pulls out a device, a phone, and stares at its blank screen in disgust. The isolation of Blackwater has always been our shield, but it also creates its own invitations. Evelyn is beside me suddenly, a presence as silent as a shift in the air. She looks past me, at the man kicking his tire in a futile gesture. "He will come to the door," she says, her voice devoid of any emotion. "He will ask to use a telephone that does not exist." I watch him. He is young, his life a bright, hot flame in the twilight. I can feel its heat from here. The familiar thirst stirs, a polite but insistent tap on my consciousness. "This one is yours, Joan," Evelyn whispers, "from beginning to end." I feel a tremor that is not fear, but a kind of dreadful anticipation. I have never taken a life that walked willingly to my door. I had only ever followed Evelyn's lead. She turns to me, her gray eyes holding mine. "It is a rite of passage. You must learn to set the table, not just partake of the meal." The man is walking toward the house now, his footsteps loud and human on the quiet gravel. He will knock. He will speak. He will step across our threshold. I smooth the front of my dark dress, a gesture left over from a life where such things mattered. I look at Evelyn, my maker, my sister, my only companion in eternity. I nod. The choice was made long ago, in a room with two dead men. Now there are only the consequences, and the endless, patient quiet waiting to be filled. I turn and walk toward the front door, my own footsteps making no sound at all. The knock was firm. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the silent hall. I paused for a moment, my hand hovering over the heavy iron latch. I could feel him on the other side, a living furnace of warmth and worry. I could almost taste the salt of his sweat on the air. I pulled the door open. He was startled, taking a half step back. His eyes, a warm brown, widened. "Oh, I'm sorry to bother you. My car. It just died on your drive. My phone's dead, too. Is there any chance I could use your landline?" His words tumbled out in a nervous rush. He was handsome in a rough, unfinished way, with calloused hands and a smudge of grease on his cheek. He looked past me into the dim hall, and I saw the flicker of unease in his gaze. The house did not look welcoming. "Of course," I said, and my voice was different. It was lower, smoother, a perfect mimicry of Evelyn's hypnotic calm. "Please come in. The telephone is in the study." I stepped aside, and he crossed the threshold. The moment he entered, the very air in the hall seemed to thicken, to still. The quiet of the house wrapped around him. He shivered, attributing it to the chill. "This is quite a place," he said, trying to fill the silence as I led him deeper inside. "Are you here alone?" "Not alone," I said, glancing toward the shadows at the top of the stairs where I knew Evelyn stood, observing. "My sister is here." I led him not to the study, but to the drawing room. The fire was low, casting long, dancing shadows. "Sit," I instructed, and he did, sinking into the high-backed velvet chair as if his strings had been cut. "I will bring you something to drink. You look parched." His gratitude was a palpable thing, sweet and naive. "Thank you, Miss Joan," I said, and the name felt like a costume I was wearing. I left him there and went to the sideboard. I poured a glass of the deep red wine from the decanter, my movements fluid and deliberate. My back was to him, a calculated risk. I could feel his eyes on me, could feel the simple human curiosity turning into a dazed fascination. The atmosphere of the house was doing its work, softening his will, making him pliant. When I turned and handed him the glass, our fingers brushed. A spark, a jolt of his life force, leapt between us. He felt it, too, his eyes widening slightly, but he dismissed it, taking a long, grateful swallow of the wine. "Id," he murmured, his voice already losing its edge of anxiety. "It is an old vintage," I said, sitting in the chair opposite him. I watched him drink. I did not need to weave a spell with words as Evelyn did. My presence, my newness to this power, was a spell in itself. He was captivated, his story spilling out. A mechanic from the city, lost on back roads, a girlfriend who had just left him. He was lonely, so terribly, usefully lonely. He finished the wine and set the glass down, his movements slow. "I feel very tired all of a sudden." "The road has been long for you," I said, standing and moving toward him. "You should rest." He looked up at me, his eyes glazed with a trust that was not his own. "Just for a moment." I stood over him as he slumped back in the chair, his head lolling to the side. The pulse in his neck beat a frantic, rhythmic tattoo against his skin. The thirst rose in me. A clean, sharp blade of need. This was my task, my initiation. I bent down, my shadow merging with his. My lips touched his throat. He sighed, a soft, yielding sound. There was the brief, sharp pain of penetration, and then the flood. It was not like the first time with Evelyn. That was a gift, a transfusion. This was a taking. It was heat and light and music. The entire symphony of his brief, vivid life rushing into the void within me. I drank until the symphony faded to a single sustained note, and then to silence. When I straightened, the body in the chair was just a shell. It looked peaceful, as the fox had, empty but unmarred. Evelyn was beside me then. She did not look at the man. She looked only at me, at the corner of my mouth where a single drop of crimson lingered. She reached out with a pale finger and wiped it away, her touch like ice. "Now you understand," she said softly. "The quiet is ours to keep and to break. Our night." Together, we carried him out into the garden, to the quiet, soft earth near the roses. The night was vast and starless above us. As I covered him with the dark, rich soil, I felt no remorse. I felt only the profound, humming satisfaction of a need fulfilled. The hunger was sated. For now, back in the house, the silence felt different. It was no longer a space to be endured, but a domain to be ruled. I went to the windowsill and picked up the locket that lay there. I opened it, looked at the unfading flower, and then I closed it in my palm. It was no longer a secret left for me. It was a part of me. I was the secret now. I was the detail waiting in the dust, the story the house would tell forever. The next morning, the only trace of the mechanic was the faint, disturbed patch of earth by the roses, which would be smooth and unturned by the following dusk. The car remained a problem. It was a hulking, modern artifact on our timeless drive, a beacon of questions. Evelyn stood beside me at the window, contemplating it. "It cannot stay," she said, her voice flat. "It will be found eventually, and they will come looking." I knew she was right. The world outside was persistent, and its lost things always had people who searched for them. "What do? We make it disappear," she replied, turning her gaze to me. "As we disappear. It is another part of your education. We waited for the sun to set. The darkness that fell over Blackwater was absolute, a velvet shroud. We did not need light to see. The world was painted in shades of heat and shadow for us now. We pushed the heavy, silent car down the long drive, our strength an effortless, chilling thing. The woods swallowed the sound of its tires on the pine needles. We took it deep, to a place where the ground was soft and boggy, a place I had never known existed on the estate. With our bare hands we dug, the earth parting like water. We buried the car as we had buried its driver, consigning it to the deep, patient earth. As we walked back to the house, the moon, a sliver of bone in the sky, I felt a new connection to the land. It was not the connection of an owner, but of a custodian. These woods were not just our home. They were our larder and our grave. Every shadowed glen, every whispering creek was a part of our survival. Days turned into weeks, then months. The memory of the mechanic faded, not with guilt, but with the simple passage of time, which for us was as smooth and featureless as a still pond. My lessons with Evelyn continued. She taught me how to listen to the whispers of the town 20 miles distant, to sense the patterns of comings and goings, to identify the lonely, the lost, the ones who would not be missed for a long, long time. We were careful, methodical. We were the reason parents warned their children not to wander too far into the woods. We were the shadow in the local folklore, a story too old to be believed by anyone but the most superstitious. One evening, as I was playing a complex sonata on the piano, my fingers finally finding the effortless grace Evelyn possessed, I hit a wrong note. The discordant sound hung in the air, a jarring rip in the fabric of our quiet. Evelyn, who had been listening with her eyes closed, opened them. Again, she said, no reproach in her voice, only a timeless patience. I began the passage again, but the wrong note echoed in my mind. It reminded me of something, a feeling from a lifetime ago. It was the sound of a choice, of a path taken. I looked at Evelyn, her perfect, ageless face illuminated by the candlelight. I had traded my humanity for this, for music and quiet and a companion for the centuries. I had thought the emptiness was filled, but as my fingers moved correctly over the keys, producing a flawless, beautiful sound, I realized the hunger was not just for life, but for meaning. And that was a thirst no amount of warmth could ever quench. The quiet was not peace. It was simply an absence of noise, and in that absence, I could now hear the echo of my own eternal silent scream. The echo of that silent scream became a new part of me, a vibration in my bones that the warmth of a life taken could not soothe. I finished the sonata, the final notes dissolving into the waiting silence of the house. Evelyn nodded, a faint approving smile on her lips. She saw mastery. She did not hear the dissonance beneath. "It is time you learned to hunt alone," she said one night, her form silhouetted against the great window. "A true predator needs no pack. It is an intimate thing, the solitary hunt. It will quiet the last of your mortal hesitations." She did not say it, but I understood. The mechanic had been a guided kill, a ritual performed under her watchful eye. This was to be different. This was to sever the final tether. I left the house as the moon rose, a cold, silver coin. I did not take the road, but moved through the woods, a ghost among the trees. My senses were acute, painting the world in a tapestry of scents and sounds. I could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit 50 yards away, smell the fierce scent of a deer that caught my wind. I passed them by. They were not what I sought. I walked for miles until the oppressive familiarity of Blackwater's pines gave way to the ragged edge of a small town. It was a pitiful place, a handful of streets clinging to the side of a hill. From the tree line, I watched the flickering blue lights of televisions in windows, the warm, mundane pulses of lives being lived in small, predictable loops. And then I saw her, an old woman sitting on the porch of a small, weathered house. She was knitting, her hands moving with a slow, rhythmic certainty. Her life was not a bright, hot flame like the mechanic's had been. It was a low, steady ember, glowing with the warmth of many decades. She was alone. I could feel the shape of her solitude, a comfortable, worn-out thing. She would not be missed until the mail piled up, perhaps not even then. The hunger in me approved. This was a practical choice, an efficient one. I stepped out of the woods and walked toward her house. My footsteps were silent on the cracked pavement. She did not look up until I was at the bottom of her porch steps. Her eyes, milky with cataracts, seemed to look through me. "Evening," she said, her voice like dry leaves. "You're out late, dear." "I'm lost," I said, and the lie was effortless. "Oh, aren't we all?" She chuckled softly, her needles never stopping. "Come sit a spell. The night's too long to spend it lost." I climbed the steps and sat in the rocking chair beside her. The wood creaked under my weight, a profoundly human sound. I could feel the slow, tired thrum of her blood. It called to the emptiness in me. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said, tilting her head. "She never comes to visit, too busy with her life in the city." I said nothing. I simply watched her, this small, contained universe of memory and regret. The hunger was a polite but urgent pressure. It was time. I leaned forward, as if to confide a secret. She turned her head toward me, a faint, grandmotherly smile on her lips. Her neck was exposed, thin and delicate, the skin like parchment. The pulse there was a slow, hypnotic rhythm, and I could not do it. The image of Duane's face, which had been fading for so long, flashed in my mind with sudden, painful clarity. His kindness, his sacrifice. This woman, with her knitting and her quiet loneliness, was not a vessel to be emptied. She was a story nearing its end, but still her own. The hunger recoiled, furious, and denied. A cold sweat broke out on my skin, a phantom of a body I no longer possessed. I stood up so quickly the rocking chair slammed back against the wall of the house. "I have to go," I whispered, the words tearing from a throat that felt human again. Her blind eyes followed the sound of my voice. "You find your way now, dear," she said, unperturbed. "The path is always there if you look for it." I fled. I ran back through the woods, not with preternatural speed, but with a clumsy, desperate haste. The branches whipped at my face. The undergrowth tangled my feet. I was not a predator. I was a ghost, a fraud. Evelyn was waiting for me in the drawing room when I returned, empty-handed and shaking. She took one look at me, and her face, usually a mask of serene composure, hardened into something ancient and cold. "You failed." It was not a question. "I couldn't," I said, the words hollow. "Your sentiment is a weakness," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "It is a cancer. It will destroy us. We are not caretakers of their fleeting lives. We are their conclusion." She turned away from me, her disappointment a physical chill in the room. "The hunger will have its due, Joan. You cannot starve it forever. When it takes you, and it will not be a clean, controlled thing. It will be a massacre. And it will be your fault." She left me standing there, alone in the vast, silent house. I looked down at my hands, pale and cold and capable of such terrible power. I had chosen an immortal hunger over a mortal death. But I was discovering there were hungers beyond the physical and deaths beyond the grave. The quiet of Blackwater was no longer a lullaby. It was the silence of a tomb, and I was finally beginning to understand that I had not escaped death at all. I had simply become a part of its endless, patient machinery. The days that followed were a new kind of silence. Evelyn's disapproval was a wall between us, as solid and cold as the stone of the house foundation. She no longer offered lessons at the piano or shared stories from her centuries. She simply existed, a beautiful frozen statue in the rooms of our home. And I was the flawed artifact she could no longer bear to look upon. The hunger began to gnaw in earnest, a constant grinding ache in the core of my being. It was no longer a polite tap, but a fist hammering on the door of my consciousness. My body felt brittle, my senses dulled. The world outside the windows seemed to gray and fade. I took to walking the grounds at night, a futile attempt to outpace the need. The memory of the old woman's peaceful face was my only shield, but it was cracking under the strain. I found myself staring at the small, scurrying lives in the underbrush with a focus that terrified me. It would not be enough. But the thought was beginning to whisper to me. It was on the third night of my starvation that I saw the light. A pinprick of orange bobbing in the woods, far from any path. A camper, lost or reckless. I stood frozen, watching it. The hunger surged, a wave of such violent craving that I doubled over. This was what Evelyn had warned me about. This was the loss of control. I moved toward the light without deciding to, pulled by an instinct older than reason. I could smell him now, the scent of wood smoke and cheap beer and the vibrant, hot blood pumping through his heart. He was young, singing off-key to a song on his phone, his back to me as he tended his small fire. My vision tunneled. The world narrowed to the pulse I could see beating in his neck. The quiet of the woods was shattered by the roaring in my ears. I was upon him before he could turn, before he could even sense a presence. There was no grace, no hypnotic calm. It was a raw, ugly tackle that sent us both sprawling into the dirt beside the fire. He cried out, a short, sharp sound of terror that was cut off as my hand clamped over his mouth. His eyes, wide and blue and full of a life I was about to extinguish, locked with mine. He fought, his limbs flailing with a strength that was nothing against my desperation. The hunger took over completely. There was no Joan, no choice, no memory of Duane or the old woman. There was only the need. I fed. It was not a symphony, as it had been with the mechanic. It was a storm, a chaotic, violent rush that left me gasping and stained, kneeling over a body that was broken and torn. The warmth flooded me, a searing heat that scoured the emptiness away and left a different, more profound void in its place. When it was over, I rolled away and stared up at the black branches weaving through the night sky. The satisfaction was there, the physical satiation, but it was drowned in a shame so deep and cold, it felt like my true death. Evelyn had been right. My failure had led to this barbarism. I did not bury him with the quiet reverence we had shown the mechanic. I covered the evidence with a frantic, brutal haste, kicking leaves and dirt over the scene. I scattered his gear and put out his fire. As I stumbled back toward Blackwater, the first light of dawn staining the horizon, I knew I was returning changed. Not initiated, but broken in. Evelyn was waiting at the edge of the garden. She saw the dirt on my clothes, the wild look in my eyes, the peace that the blood had forced upon my features. She did not smile. She simply nodded, a slow, grim acceptance. "You see," she said softly, "the hunger always wins. It is the one truth of our existence. Welcome home, Joan." She turned and walked back to the house, and I followed, my steps heavy. I had faced the choice, and found I had no choice at all. The quiet settled around me once more, but it was not the same. It was the silence of the grave I had just made, and I knew then that I would never truly hear anything else. The next few weeks were a study in grim acceptance. Evelyn's demeanor thawed, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a pragmatic, almost clinical air. We were partners in a grim enterprise, no longer teacher and prodigy. We developed a system. The car remained a problem, a tangible link to a world that was beginning to feel like a distant dream. We could not bury every vehicle that came with a guest. "We must be like water," Evelyn instructed, her fingers tracing a route on a dusty old map of the county. "We must learn to move things, to redirect the flow. The car will be found, but it must be found far from here, in a way that tells a simple, believable story." We waited for a moonless night. With a set of tools taken from the mechanic's own box, I worked under Evelyn's direction. my newfound strength making the task effortless. We siphoned the fuel. I hot-wired the ignition, a skill she demonstrated with an unnerving familiarity. Then, with me behind the wheel and Evelyn following in her own elegant vintage car, we drove the dead man's vehicle 50 miles away, to a steep, treacherous curve overlooking a ravine known for accidents. I set the car in neutral, released the brake, and watched it roll silently over the edge. The crash was a distant, muffled protest from the depths. It would be found eventually. A tragic end for a lonely man. A closed case. Driving back with Evelyn, the silence in the car was a shared understanding. This was our life now. A life of erasure. I looked at my reflection in the side view mirror, my face pale and perfect in the dark glass. I searched for a trace of the woman who had wept over a pressed flower, who had hesitated on a porch. I saw only a mask. The hunger returned, of course. It always would. But now, when I went out, I did not walk. I drove. I ranged farther, to bus stations and roadside bars on the edges of forgotten towns. I learned to spot the ones whose absence would create the smallest ripple. A man with a worn backpack and no destination. A woman who looked over her shoulder too often, as if hoping no one was there. Their lives were not symphonies or storms. They were brief, sad songs, and I learned to drink them down with a detached efficiency that left my hands clean and my soul numb. I had become the secret the house kept. I was the thing that walked in the dust, that settled in the quiet corners. I was the conclusion to a story that always began with a wrong turn. And as the years began to blur, I understood that Evelyn's greatest lesson was not about the hunt or the kill, but about the enduring, eternal silence that came after. It was a silence I was learning to not just inhabit, but to love. For in that silence, there was no echo, no memory, and no pain. There was only the next thirst, and the quiet, endless wait to quench it. The turning point came on a night indistinguishable from 100 others. I was in a city 2 hours away, in a neighborhood where the streetlights were broken, and the air smelled of fried food and decay. My target was a man arguing with a shadow in an alley, his life a tangled, bitter knot I felt no urge to unravel. The hunger was a dull throb, a manageable background noise. I was poised to move, to become just another urban statistic, when a sound froze me. It was a child's laughter. It came from a second-story window above the alley. A bright, clear peal of pure, uncomplicated joy. The sound was so alien, so utterly disconnected from the grime and the despair of that place, that it pierced the layers of my detachment like a shard of glass. I looked up. A small, round face was pressed against the window, watching the falling rain. A woman's hand came into view, gently pulling the child away, and the laughter faded. The man in the alley stumbled, cursing. He was nothing. A sip of warm water to a woman dying of thirst. But the laughter, it was a memory. It was a ghost of a feeling from a world I had forfeited. It was the echo of a choice I had never truly made, but had simply accepted. I did not take the man. I turned and walked away, leaving him to his angry, meaningless fate. The hunger roared in protest, a physical pain that made my vision swim. But beneath it, something else stirred. Something colder and more determined than the hunger had ever been. When I returned to Blackwater, Evelyn was at the piano, her music a complex, beautiful web of sound that usually ensnared me. Tonight, it was just noise. I stood in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the Persian rug. I did not feed, I said. My voice was flat, empty of the shame or defiance she might have expected. Her hands stilled on the keys. The sudden silence was heavier than the music had been. She turned, her eyes searching my face. She saw the emptiness, but she did not see the resignation she was looking for. She saw a new kind of stillness. "The hunger will break you," she stated. her voice a low warning. "Perhaps," I replied, "or perhaps I will break it." A faint, almost imperceptible frown touched her lips. It was the first crack I had ever seen in her perfect composure. "There is no breaking it, Joan. There is only serving it, or being destroyed by it. There is no third path." I looked past her, at our reflection in the dark, rain-streaked window. Two elegant women in a beautiful dead house. A perfect, eternal picture. I had thought the hunger was for life, and then for meaning. Now I understood it was simply for an end. My existence was a sentence, not a gift. And every life I took was just another word in a story I no longer wanted to read. "I'm going to my room," I said. "I am tired." I walked past her, up the grand staircase. I did not go to my room. I went to the attic, a place of dust and forgotten things. In an old trunk, beneath a stack of yellowed sheet music, I found what I was looking for. It was the pressed flower from Duane's grave, brittle and brown. I held it in my palm, this tiny, weightless artifact of a single selfless act. It was not a weapon. It was not a shield. It was just a reminder that something else had once been true. I did not know what I would do. I did not have a plan. But as I stood there in the dusty silence, listening to the faint, lonely notes of Evelyn's piano begin again downstairs, I knew that my education was, at last, complete. I had learned the final, most important lesson. I had learned how to want an end. And the wanting was a different kind of hunger altogether.